Joining us now, CNN political commentator Errol Lewis and former Republican Congressman of Texas, Will Hurd. It's good to have you with us still, Errol. Good to welcome you to the table. Good morning. You read this Washington Post reporting? Yeah. I thought it was really remarkable reporting. My question, though, is do you believe that if the president had listened to Chris Kaiser's lawyer and they had gone to the Justice Department and said, look, let's settle this out, DOJ would have agreed to that? And also, would they have ever agreed to something without an admission of wrongdoing, at least?
Well, let's take it a step further before this. When NARA, the National Administration for, I forget what the R stands for.
It's so funny. We're like, right? NARA, PRA, FRA.
Sure. When they ask for the documents back, just give them back. And we wouldn't be in this position, right? If Donald Trump would have followed that law, we wouldn't be here. And yes, maybe there would have been an opportunity. DOJ probably didn't want to prosecute this case because they knew the drama it was going to come into. But we're not shocked that Donald Trump would rather have a fight than follow the law. And to me, this is crazy that so many people are defending him for doing this, and we wouldn't be in this position if he would have turned them back. We know that because when Mike Pence was found out had documents, he turned them all back, and it was fine. The DOJ is not persecuting Donald Trump on any of the documents that he actually did return.
Mm-hmm.
So
all those 31 counts
all those other 31
are from the August search.
The stuff that he hid. Now, my question is, why is he trying to keep track of them? He could still have access to them. The question is how they were being stored. And when is Donald Trump going to tell us all the steps he took to prevent people from coming into his hotel and accessing those documents? It's very clear that Donald Trump knew he had classified information. He knew he had information that was so sensitive that the classification is classified. Right? There were several of those documents that had where it said that there was in the classification line, they're marked out, they're redacted, because the classification itself is classified. So he knew he had this stuff. He knew that they were in places that were accessible by his members and by his staff. And when is Donald Trump going to tell us, these are the steps I took to prevent the Chinese government, to prevent the Russians from trying to come in and bribing my members or bribing my staff in order to get access to us? Like, those are the questions Donald Trump should be doing. And guess what? We wouldn't be in this position if he just gave the documents back.
So what's interesting, though, is those are not the questions. Clearly, they're being addressed, right, to your point. I don't know if we'll ever hear those answers. They're also not the questions that are being raised by those who are supporting the president and saying this is ridiculous, this is nothing but politicized. Does this change anything? As we move forward, we got a little bit of time that we're going to be talking about this.
Yeah, there's a real misinformation factor here. I watched the former president ranting and raving from the front steps at Bedminster. And it was really disappointing to hear him talk about this Sox case, because you go back and look at it, at first a lot of us were like, wait, he's talking about this thing? It's 10 years old. Judicial Watch, which is an advocacy organization, tried to intervene and make the case that when President Clinton spoke with a historian and then got a copy of the tapes, it's as if any of us as journalists, talked with a public figure and then gave him a copy of the tape, that somehow became a public record that would be subject to all kinds of disclosure. It went to court. It was a dead loser, and they lost. And yet here they are still telling the former president this, and he's now propagating it out there, and you saw it spread all across social media. So now there are lots and lots of people, possibly thousands, dare we say even millions, who now somehow believe that a president, a former president, can take any record they want.
But that's the point, right?
And treat it as their personal property.
That's exactly the point.
But it's
there.
It really is striking, because it is such a dead loser. It is dead on arrival when it makes it to court. And unfortunately, sort of confusion and falsehood are now being deployed as a political and legal strategy. I would not advise anybody to get on that train. That's going nowhere.
I want you to listen to some of your fellow Republicans, Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, making their case on Fox.
If this indictment is true, if what it says is actually the case, President Trump was incredibly reckless with our national security.
I had hoped the Department of Justice would see its way clear to resolve these issues with the former president without moving forward with charges.
This is a rogue agency that is thoroughly politicized. It is thoroughly weaponized. And I believe to indict a former president or sitting president, the threshold should be very, very high. If you're going to indict someone for having classified documents, how about Joe Biden and the classified documents he had stuck in just about every orifice of his body? He had stuck in a garage next to his old Corvette.
Ted Cruz went to Harvard Law School. Ted Cruz knows what obstruction is. He knows the difference between what's going on right now with the special counsel investigating Joe Biden's documents, still ongoing, Robert Hur, and what Jack Smith's team has brought here. But this is politics, no?
It's absolutely politics, right? And we can separate all of these issues. We can have a conversation about whether or not DOJ should be doing something or not be doing something. That's a valid conversation. As a former CIA guy, right, you know, the CIA and the FBI has always gotten in, you know, loggerheads on issues, right? So we can talk about the role of federal law enforcement. All that stuff is valid. But we know these facts. We have audio. We know what the president was doing. Yes, you're innocent until proven guilty, and that's what's going to transpire down in Miami over the next couple of months. But let's be honest, if the GOP is supposed to be the party of law and order, then we need to be the party of law and order when it comes to our own folks. We should actually hold our side more accountable to a higher ethical standard than not. And so this is the part that's frustrating. And instead of talking about the problems with the Joe Biden administration and why his numbers are so low and one of the lowest approval ratings of a president at this time, instead of talking about that, we're having these debates about Donald Trump's baggage and continued drama. That's not good for the GOP. That's not good for us to potentially win elections. And ultimately, it's not good for the country. So why start defending someone who only cares about one thing? And Donald Trump doesn't care about the future of America. He cares about preventing himself and from going to prison and potentially dying in prison.
It was so interesting because, to that point, Errol, when he spoke at Bedminster after the arraignment, he essentially said, this is about you guys. This is about, he talked about Christians, pro-life groups. He talked about much of America saying, if they go after me like this, they're going to go after you like this.
That's exactly right. I mean, that is the Trump brand at this point. It's the political argument that he's making, which is that, you know, the people that you hate, I hate. Your enemies are my enemies. Let's go have a fight, which is very different than talking about, you know, tax policy or what to do about education or how to wrap up the pandemic and have a more robust public health system or anything really more important that people actually care about. Why? Well, because it gets him a rise. He's 40, 50 points ahead of his nearest competitor in the polls. It seems to work. As the congressman points out, there's going to be a bill that comes due when the independents get into it, when possible swing voters get into it. When you get to the general election phase, you'll end up where he ended up in 2020, which is in the losers column.
And can I just add on that, right? Only 23% of the country votes in primaries, okay? And so we always talk about what's going to happen in the primary. Why does only 23% of the country vote in primaries? It's because 77% thinks all the things people are talking about is absolute nonsense. They're not interested in some of these things. Look, the places I've been the last couple of days, nobody's asking me about Donald Trump keeping, classified documents next to the crapper. They're just, pardon my language.
It's 7:12 a.m. and kids watching this.
Easy,
I'm getting worked up. Y'all got
What
me.
are they asking
Look, you know what they're worried about? 65% of Americans are afraid that artificial intelligence and robots are going to take their jobs. They're worried about whether their kids are going to be able to have a good paying job when they graduate from college. Recent graduates are concerned that why is their ability to make a starting salary less than their parents? These are the questions people care about. People are worried about, why can't I have my kids and grandkids playing in parks in some of our big cities, because these cities, entities, and mayors can't figure out how to address homelessness in a compassionate way, or deal with crime, right? These are the questions that people, that folks that are worried about putting food on the table, roof over their head, and make sure that people are healthy, happy, and safe. Those are the things that we should be talking about. And again, as a politician, as a member of the GOP, if we start talking about those things, right, we have an opportunity to take it to deal with the frustration that independents are feeling. The number of Democrats that don't want to see, 7 out of 10 Americans do not want to see Joe Biden on the election, on the ballot next year, right? That's the opportunity.
A lot of them don't want to see Trump on the ballot.
Amen to that. Look, I've said it.
And you have to cut through the loudest voice here, right? I mean, that's the other issue. Why are those things not being talked about? Because Donald Trump is sucking all the oxygen out of the room. We have one more, though, Republican, about to throw their hat in the ring. So you've got Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, right? Filing paperwork. We're expecting that announcement to come. I guess the question is, this is getting increasingly busy here. This Republican field, the pool is quite full at this point, but apparently the water is very nice. Does that make it harder to have those conversations?
So I actually don't think so, right? And I recognize my perspective is unique from most people. Options are always better, okay? Options are always better. Let's have a diversity of thought and ideas. Let's have a competition of ideas within the party. Now, that requires there being a competition, and unfortunately, too many people are only talking about defending Donald Trump and wanting to say they're going to pardon him if something happens. Like, that's insane to me. But a competition, we should never be afraid of competition, right? And so what happens is, can somebody articulate a vision for the country that inspires people to come out and make a decision on a particular day? I think that is what is ultimately missing. And the thing that I've learned in my decade or so in politics, what I call the professional political class, right? These are the pollsters, the people that run races. They always tell you to do the same thing over and over, right? And guess what? We get the same boring results every time. And so let's do something different, because the reality is we live in complicated times. I love that in the lead up to this, y'all were talking about this drone, right? And how the Ukrainians are being able to use new technology in warfare. This is game changer. What does this mean for conflict between China and Taiwan and us? These are all kinds of the questions that we should be having.
What's so interesting? Are you running, by the way?
I haven't made a decision, but I got to
sound like a candidate.
Well, I got to make a decision soon.
When will the decision come?
Soon.
What? Yeah. Come on.
Well, look.
What is soon?
Here's the thing.
Before Labor Day?
There's so much about these issues.
No, I do. Look, as you know, my beautiful wife is with me today, and you can tell her I do things on my own time. I do things on my own time. Okay. And when we're ready to make a decision, we'll make a decision.
The point before we go that I wanted to make is, I'm so glad you brought up AI. I was at a dinner with some CEOs last night, and this is what is #1 on their mind, like some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies. They're thinking about that. They're thinking about the impact on jobs, the good, the bad, the ugly. But I think Congressman Hurd makes a great point, Errol. That is not what any of those Republican contenders or Joe Biden are talking most about.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's give a little bit of credit to the political class, these pollsters and the consultants who take so much money from candidates year after year. They do stuff not because it doesn't work, they do it because it does work. And if, working means winning that next primary, getting a bump in the polls, putting out a message that'll get a lot of donors to give small amounts to you, all of the different things that candidates have to do. There may be something fundamentally broken with our system because we incentivize a lot of the wrong things, like saying whatever nonsense will get somebody to click on your email and give you $24 or whatever it is you're asking for. But that's where we are.
So it's our fault.
Well, I mean, look, we have some responsibility.
We're not donating, so it's not our fault.
we have some responsibility. I mean, and look, and it's something, look, we all know this just from the news business. Year after year, you go through the polls. What's the most important thing? People will say education, they'll say the economy and so forth. And then the minute you try to activate that and say, well, are you willing now to actually pay a couple of pennies more for your school's education? And people go and grab their pitchforks and their torches and they say, hell no. So, we've got to, and now is exactly the right time. We've got to tell these presidential candidates of whatever party exactly what it is we want. We have to insist that they pay attention to what it is we want and not what some pollster has told them is going to activate us. And then I think we have to adapt some of the same defensiveness that we take with television commercials or anything
and
else.
hold them to account, right? That's the other thing, right? Hold you to account in terms of what you ran on, what you talked about, what was the action. We're in big trouble because we went way over there, but stay with us. More to come.
As the congressman just mentioned,